This video is part 2 of a 3-part series. If you want to see the first video, there is a link in the description. Last time, I talked about the failures of Sony and their attempts to create a cinematic universe to rival that of Marvel. Now, when talking about this, it is important to note that on some level, they somewhat managed to succeed in making films based around Spider-Man characters. First with Venom, and its sequel, Let There Be Carnage, and the upcoming Morbius. Now, regardless of the quality of these films, which is very, very poor, you don't need to be a scientist to see that the plans that they once had were much bigger, as they were planning to create their own cinematic universe that could stand its ground alongside that of Marvel and DC. I mean, say what you want about the DCEU, most of the films were really bad, but at least they did release a number of films with these characters, something that Sony didn't really do, aside from the aforementioned exceptions. So, let's start with perhaps the most interesting film of the cancelled plans for their own cinematic universe, their Sinister Six film. So let's go back to December of 2013, when Drew Goddard, who at the time was best known for his work on Cabin in the Woods, was hired to work on 2 projects based on Marvel characters, one for Marvel and one for Sony. For Marvel, he was hired to work as a showrunner and executive producer on the first season of Daredevil, which was a joint collaboration between Marvel, Netflix, and ABC Studios. Meanwhile, he was hired by Sony to work on a Sinister Six film, which directly tied into the end of Amazing Spider-Man 2, as can be seen in this clip.
You've made progress.
I've identified several worthy candidates. Now that Spider-Man's gone, this city will never be the same. How many men did you have in mind?
I want to keep it small. Everything you need is already at Oscorp.
This was announced alongside a solo Venom movie, but this was different from the film that we actually got. Originally, he was hired to write the film with the option to direct, and the film was planned to release between Amazing Spider-Man 3 and 4, which we previously discussed. Now, in case you don't know who the Sinister Six are, as the name implies, Sinister means villains and Six means, well, 6.
Mono means one, and rail means rail.
But in all seriousness now, they are a group of villains that team up to get rid of Spider-Man, with a roster of villains varying depending on which Spider-Man we are talking about. And make no mistake, this was going to be a pretty important building block for Sony's Spider-Man cinematic universe, even so far as to starting plans for a multi-story arc that would have spanned several films and would have been spearheaded by the Amazing Spider-Man 2 writers Alex Kurtzman, Roberto Orci, Jeff Pinker, El Solomon, and Drew Goddard himself, alongside the producers of the previous films Avi Arad and Matt Tolmach, with additional help by Amazing Spider-Man director Mark Webb. With Sony even calling this team their brain trust. With the plan set in motion, producers Arad and Tolmach gave a brief insight of what they wanted to do with the Sinister Six.
Nothing is sacred. I mean, it's gonna be the best 6 that you can imagine, but it's gonna make sense in the world.
When you translate comic to film, the word classic means the first 50 issues.
Yeah.
Because after that, we all made changes. Changes that had to do with science fiction turning into science. I think just the need to move this world forward. So, of course, we'll make adaptations about these guys and what was their motivation. Because many of them have multiple motivations. Depends, is it Ultimate Spider-Man? Is it Spider-Man? Is it some 3-piece issue that take them to space? We have a bigger responsibility, is to represent the character of the villain as it was conceived, because that's why they survived the test of time. All the rest, that's a movie. What an opportunity.
You know, again, what we've been talking about is there's no such thing as just a villain. You know, there are villains by virtue of choices that people make, but they always begin as humans, as characters, as flawed people, as tragic people. You know, there are great movies have been made about guys, a bunch of bad guys who get together to do something.
Seven Samurai.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge tradition of it. Those are sometimes the greatest characters to watch. A bunch of broken people coming together for whatever reason. It doesn't
always
mean
have
they're
this
not
one thing in common. they'll hate Spider-Man. And they'll hate him because he's so different than them. But then, you know, when you sit by yourself somewhere and you think about it, they all had a different life at one time. Yeah. And that's what's so beautiful about the Spider-Man universe. They have amazing stories if you look at it. And everybody's looking for redemption. They're unforgiven. But you see one of the Sinister Six starting to feel like that, yes. And people love it, by the way. They love when a villain finds his way back, because we're all very forgiving.
It's a bunch of badass characters doing something, you know? It's like, let's admit that we love watching that.
Avi Arad would later mention that he wanted the Sinister Six would be, above all, a redemption story, which is an interesting angle for a movie that is all about villains getting together to kill Spider-Man. Several ideas were thrown around, and now we know several of these thanks to the Sony leaks, which we discussed already in the previous video. One of the ideas was that the film was going to take place in the Savage Land, and if you don't know what the Savage Land is, I don't blame you. Neither did I. But if you want to know, it was a place that was originally created for the X-Men comics, which is a prehistoric land that was created by aliens to study the process of evolution, hidden from the rest of the world in the middle of the Antarctic. And as time passed, it would become home to several species, including extinct ones, to mutations of known species. And despite being meant to be hidden from the rest of the world, it's a pretty well-known place within the world of the Marvel comics, even appearing in several Spider-Man comics.
Hate this place so much. And where am I again? The Savage Land. Deep in the heart of Antarctica, hidden from man is a primordial world. Fierce dinosaurs, exploding volcanoes, venomous plants. If it's dangerous, it's here.
So basically, it's Jurassic Park in the middle of the Antarctica, set within the Marvel universe. Anyways, back to the Sinister Six. The main question that most people have is who are going to be the main roster of villains that would make up the Sinister Six. And though we never got official confirmation, it seems that Goddard was looking for Dr. Octopus, the Vulture, Sandman, Mysterio, Black Cat, and, get this, even Spider-Man himself for the roster of the Sinister Six. The reason for this seems to be that Drew Goddard believed that the only way he could make a character like Doc Ock work was alongside Spider-Man. In one of the leaked emails, he wrote the following. The partnership between Spidey and Doc Ock was something O'Connor suggested should have greater emphasis, comparing and contrasting Otto Octavius' story arc to that of Michael Corleone in the Godfather trilogy. I think Michael Corleone is the greatest birth of villain/protagonist as villain. Not sure if it's exactly analogous to Ock, but I like the idea of Ock as a character you are totally rooting for even though he is doing bad things, and obviously the transformation from innocence to experience. Also, both characters are essentially motivated by family. Second, I was thinking about the iconic rivalry between Ock and Spidey, and I think that it would be great if after Spidey helps Ock, and you really feel they are friends and want them to be on the same side, Ock has to do something that makes Spidey and the audience realize that they will never be able to be on the same side again, because the birth of Doc Ock's story is only complete if you ended with the establishment of the iconic Spidey rivalry. Despite claiming that he thought that the character of Spider-Man was indispensable to the character development of Dr. Octopus, Goddard also considered trying a Sinister Six without Spider-Man, as he also stated in a different email. I'm really feeling that for a Sinister Six movie to work without Spidey in it, we need a movie star in the lead role. I'm not sure if I could convince him to do it, but someone like Matt Damon as Doc Ock? And apparently, Tolmec loved the idea of Mr. Good Will Hunting and Jason Bourne as Doc Ock too. Either that or the Matthew he's talking about is referring to Matthew McConaughey. Beyond Matt Damon as Dr. Octopus, Goddard was really interested in bringing in Emily Blunt as either Black Cat or a female version of Scorpion, writing, "As Sinister is laying out, I don't think we need Scorpion for this one, but fuck. Even as I type this, picture Emily Blunt with a scorpion tail on. Oh goddammit, now I might need her for Sinister Six, or at least Sinister Six 2. But perhaps the biggest name that Drew Goddard was interested in bringing in was Tom Hardy to play Sandman. As you'll know, Tom Hardy ended up playing Venom in Sony's film based on the character. Goddard wrote in an email that was clearly not meant to be seen by the public, "I'm gonna write him up a note this weekend, but off the top of my head, some possible talking points are, we're doing something different. It's time to celebrate the bad guys for once. We're inspired by the classic team/mission of movies, Dirty Dozen, Magnificent Seven, The Guns of Navarone. We want that spirit, that swagger. If the Spider-Man franchise is the Beatles, then we're the Sex Pistols." Flint Marko is gonna steal the show. The character is pure id, the anarchic enthusiast of the team, a chance to have fun while celebrating being bad. Tom embodies that anarchy, that triumphant nihilism. We've seen him tap into that spirit before in roles like Bronson, but now we have the chance to crank that volume up to 11. He's gonna storm through London at the end like God freaking Scylla. That is not purple prose, he's going to be as tall as skyscrapers in the third act of the movie. What does Doctor Strange have? Magic tricks? Fuck you, magic tricks, we've got a skyscraper Tom Hardy knocking down buildings. Wow, he even threw shade at the then upcoming Doctor Strange, so he must have been very proud of his script. And the way he describes it, it does sound like a very interesting and a very unique way to look at the Sinister Six. But I do think that the way that Drew Goddard describes sounds a bit different to how the producers made it sound, with Goddard making it sound like James Gunn's Suicide Squad, but the producers making it sound like the 2016 Suicide Squad. Speaking of Suicide Squad, if you haven't seen Peacemaker yet, you absolutely should. Anyways, it seems that this email was enough to convince Sony's chairwoman Amy Pascal to write an email to Tom Hardy directly, where she basically says the same thing that Drew Goddard told her. I can call you and tell you more about this next week, but because you know how much I want to make movies with you, I wanted to put this in your brain. We're going to make the Sex Pistols of superhero movies, where all the characters are the bad guys. It's sort of a celebration of these guys in the vein of the Dirty Dozen and the Professionals and the Wild Bunch and all those fantastic movies from the 1960s. It is based on a comic book called The Sinister Six, part of the Marvel Universe. Drew Goddard is writing and directing. He has written and produced a lot: Lost, Cloverfield, World War Z, but what really shows how brilliant he is a wickedly twisted genius of a little movie he made called Cabin in the Woods. Smart and funny and shows fantastic range. A little jewel. I think he's gonna email you, and we talked about maybe getting you guys together. As if the Savage Land idea wasn't enough, Goddard was also planned to bring in the character of Gog, a relatively unknown villain from the Spider-Man comics. In case you don't know, Gog is an alien monster who, after crash landing in the Savage Land, is raised by the Spider-Man villain Kraven the Hunter. Producer Michael DeLuca offered some ideas as to how they could implement Gog into the narrative of the film, but he was afraid that the character could be too cosmic and could even work to the film's disadvantage, saying, "Gog is tough because then you're into a giant humanoid creature from another dimension. Feige has had success with the cosmic side of things, but it's a tricky line to walk. The shitty Fantastic Four movies, treatment of the Silver Surfer and Galactus are the cautionary tale." He elaborated on this by saying, Gog could always just be trying to get his hands on weapons tech that masks a true, more nefarious mission that could involve bringing Gog, and maybe the Six have a puppet master that is a twist reveal like Redford in Cap 2. Here he is obviously referring to the character played by Robert Redford in Captain America: The Winter Soldier, who is secretly controlling S.H.I.E.L.D. And I really have to bring up James Gunn's Suicide Squad again, because the idea of implementing Gog in Sinister Six sounds strangely similar to that of Starro the Conqueror in the Suicide Squad. Think about it, it's about a group of rogues gallery that's sent into a mission that secretly has a more nefarious purpose by someone that's controlling them. Or who knows, maybe it's just a coincidence. You know what they say, great minds think alike. It seems that Drew Goddard himself was still unsure on how to use Gog in the film, as Amy Pascal replied to the Lucas email by saying, Drew also likes Gog, but hasn't figured out how to use him. Other story elements included breaches in the space-time continuum, likely caused by Dr. Octopus, and huge sequences set in Paris and London. There were also plans for Spider-Man to use the Black Symbiote as a way to set up the then upcoming Venom solo film. A leaked email states, "Let's talk, this is really similar to what Matt Tolmach pitched me about Venom, which he doesn't think is a movie on its own, but that Spider-Man and Sinister Six are the team in the next movie. He goes to them for help, maybe fights Carnage, or he wears the black suit, but all the Sinister Six guys think it's lame and he takes it off and it falls into the wrong hands." Here's an interview of Goddard talking about Sinister Six.
Sinister Six is obviously the one a lot of people are talking about. I mean, how big a role can we potentially expect to see Spider-Man play in this one? Or is this very much going to be focusing on the villains?
Well, the truth is, we're a few years out from any Sinister Six happening, so a lot can change between now and then. But my idea for it was always to make it a big epic Spider-Man movie. Yeah.
But sort of potentially a versus movie then.
Sort of, yeah. I can't say too much or Marvel will execute me. but the idea was to just celebrate all the things I love about Spider-Man.
If you think that these are too many things to just appear in one film, you'd be correct. back. This is because the film was still in very early stages of development, so it's very possible that they were seeing what could and couldn't work within the film, but maybe that's giving them too much credit considering the amount of subplots that Amazing Spider-Man 2 had. In May 2014, it was announced that Drew Goddard left as showrunner of Daredevil, and instead of writing the whole season, he ended up only writing the first 2 episodes, which, in my opinion, are the 2 best episodes of the entire series. Though he would still remain as a consultant and executive producer throughout the series' whole 3-season run, and even return to the Marvel Marvel Disney Plus shows by writing an episode of The Defenders. Some sources claim that he left Daredevil to properly work on Sinister Six. I find that hard to believe, partly because Drew Goddard has never confirmed it, but mainly because I find it hard to believe that Drew Goddard would leave a surefire deal like Daredevil for something that wasn't even in pre-production yet, like Sinister Six. However, even in this stage, there were still some problems. The main one being that the film setting, the Savage Land, because it had first appeared in X-Men comics, it was unknown if the rights belonged to Fox or Marvel. When they found out that they were owned by Marvel, Sony's chairwoman Amy Pascal was none too happy about the news, as she wrote in an email, "I suggest you guys get in a room this morning and go over Drew's pitch and what is in Savage Land comics and make sure we are okay and not in a situation where they can find any footholds. We have known for weeks that Drew was setting his story on a tropical island with dinosaurs and time travel portals. We cannot be in a vulnerable position in any way in this story. This is top priority for today," meaning that it's very likely that the film wouldn't have taken place in the Savage Land but a place very similar to it. Other problems included budgetary issues, as Sony wasn't sure how much a film like this would cost to make and if they could get the then Spider-Man Andrew Garfield to appear in the film, as his contract was for 3 Spider-Man films, which was likely meant for the also cancelled Amazing Spider-Man 3. However, all of these problems would be frankly irrelevant, as Sony began negotiating with Marvel and Disney to make Spider-Man join the MCU after they decided to reboot Spider-Man and cancel the Amazing Spider-Man 3 for reasons we previously discussed. In January of 2015, all of the planned Sony Spider-Man spin-offs were cancelled, including Sinister Six, so that they could focus more on Spidey's time on the MCU, first with Captain America Civil War and then with its own film Spider-Man Homecoming. One key thing to note is that Marvel and Sony briefly considered Drew Goddard to direct the next Spider-Man film, Homecoming, before director John Watts was brought along. I think that it would have been very interesting to see him direct a Spider-Man film, and we likely would have even gotten that Daredevil cameo much sooner than we actually did.
I'm a really good lawyer.
Despite the project being shelved in the best case scenario, Drew Goddard still remains hopeful that the project will be made someday. When asked by IGN, "It's fair to say that the now shelved Sinister Six was your dream project," he replied, "For sure, I've always wanted to do a Spider-Man project, and to come at it slightly differently just felt right for me. I was really excited about that one, but who knows what the future holds. The allure of Peter Parker is strong. It's a long game. It could still happen. It's certainly not going to happen soon, but for me, the making of it is the special part. Then after that, it's the business part. I want people to see these things, but it's done. And with Sinister, you know I love that script. It was really fun. I love the artist I was working with. I'd love to make that movie someday. But if we don't, I still got to write it, I still got to do it, and you can't take that away from me. When you're doing just a straightforward superhero movie, you don't need a lot of villains. The focus is on one guy. I think with Sinister Six, it's different. To me, it's less about too many villains and more about too many antagonists, and there's a distinction. You never say the Dirty Dozen has too many characters, they're all villains, or you could argue that, but they're protagonists. The trick with Sinister Six is that I was making everyone the protagonist and less about 6-on-1 and more about coming at it a little differently. That was the idea. You have to be true to it. You can still have protagonists be evil. That's the secret. Look at something like, say, Reservoir Dogs. They're protagonists, but Michael Madsen is a complete psychopath. It's okay, you can do both. One of the fun things is that there have been so many iterations over the years that you can just mix and match, and I can't say who I ended up with, but that was the fun part, figuring it out. I felt strongly that I wanted this movie to stand on its own. I feel like, in general, I get tired of these movies when they're becoming too much of a puzzle for people to solve. I'm like, no, just have fun. Later, in another interview, he reiterated his feelings that the film would happen eventually, while also reflecting about his time working on the film industry. It was really fun. I wouldn't have done it if I had not thought that there was a real opportunity to do something different and exciting and just flat out bananas. It was very much me, and a much more commercial version of the Cabin in the Woods mentality. The punk rock mentality that led to Cabin is very much at the core of Sinister Six. That's a fun one. Who knows, it could still see the light of day. It's funny, I've been through a lot of volatility at a lot of different studios, between MGM and Sony and Fox. At a certain point, you start to realize, oh, this is just a volatile business, and you try to stay afloat as the boat rocks back and forth. In 2018, Amy Pascal confirmed that the film could in fact still happen, saying, "I'm just waiting for Drew to be ready to direct it. I would do anything with Drew Goddard. I'm just waiting for him to tell me he wants to." And the last interview in which Drew Goddard talked about Sinister Six, he said, "It was the giant, epic Spider-Man movie of my dreams. My vision of that movie was a summer annual, so you didn't have to worry about continuity. It was just, we take Peter, put him on an adventure, we put him back on his life. I intentionally wanted a movie that didn't have to worry about mythology and continuity. It was important to me to make a movie that could stand on its own. So the good news is, it slots in very well to any plan anybody ever wants. We just need to let a couple years go by, I think." So even in his last interview about Sinister Six, he remains hopeful that the film would be made someday. When interviewed about the project, Amazing Spider-Man Andrew Garfield stated that he really liked the concept of Drew's Sinister Six project, saying, "I don't know how close it got, but I definitely had a few meetings, and it was really exciting, I've gotta say, because I love Drew so much, and I love Cabin in the Woods and the other stuff he has made. We just got on like a house on fire. I loved his vision. He's so unique and odd and off-kilter and unconventional in his creative choices. Maybe one day he'll get to do it, but it would have been cool." It's nice to see that everyone involved with a project like the film and even have hope that it can still happen. Though 6 Spider-Man villains have appeared in the latest Spider-Man movie, No Way Home, they didn't appear together, nor they were referred to as the Sinister Six, so the idea of a Sinister Six film could still be fresh. Whether or not we might still see one remains unknown. But hey, I like the idea, and with Sony continuing to make movies about Spider-Man villains, and now with rekindled interest in Sony's Amazing Spider-Man films, there is a very likely chance that this could still happen one day. Not to mention that Drew Goddard has proven himself to be very talented when it comes to working with Marvel characters. Daredevil speaks for itself. With Sinister Six now out of the way, we can finally talk about all of the other films that never made it past the planning stages but that we know thanks to the Sony leaks. The first one being a project under the codename Glass Ceiling, of which we know very little about, but what we do know is that it would have involved a different universe in which Gwen Stacy would have become Spider-Gwen and led a team of female superheroes from Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery, with Westwood writer Lisa Joy attached to write. For those who don't know, the term Glass Ceiling refers to an invisible barrier that prevent someone from advancing to a higher level due to some kind of discrimination. In this case, it seems that the discrimination they were referring to was sexism, which, oh boy, I'm sure a certain group of people would have loved it. It was planned to release in 2017. One leaked email revealed that Emma Stone was in talks to return as Gwen Stacy, and as if that wasn't enough, she was going to be resurrected for The Amazing Spider-Man 4. By the way, I saved this detail for this video in particular. And here's the real kicker. She would have been revealed as a plot twist to actually be the villain, Carnage, which, you know what? It actually sounds like a pretty good idea. And while we're talking about Amazing Spider-Man, let me make a brief side note about what I said about Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man in the previous video. I mentioned that maybe he wasn't the best choice for Spider-Man, but after seeing him in No Way Home, well, let's just say that I may have to print a retraction.
I haven't printed a retraction in 20 years!
I mean, don't get me wrong, I still think that the Amazing Spider-Man films were awful, but maybe Andrew Garfield was in fact the right choice to play Spider-Man. But, you know, just because they had a good actor in a leading role doesn't automatically make the film good. Man, something tells me I'm going to have to say that a bajillion times when the Kenobi show comes out. But I digress. Though the planned Glass Ceiling was cancelled, it seems Sony hasn't given up on the idea of a female-led Spider-Verse, as now they are actually planning something very similar, only that this time set in the universe of Into the Spider-Verse. So instead of being led by Emma Stone's Spider-Gwen, it will be led by Hailey Steinfeld's Spider-Gwen, alongside Spider-Woman and Silk. So, sorry guys, maybe next time. And like I mentioned, the planned Venom film and the Venom film we actually got were completely different, as they originally planned for Alan Tudyk to be Venom and Finn Wittrock to be Carnage. Though they have somewhat rescinded the rights to make Spider-Man films, Sony still has several films for the future. A Kraven the Hunter film and a film called Silver and Black, a film centered on Black Cat and Silver Sable, directed by Gina Prince Bythewood. Unfortunately, this film hasn't received any updates since 2018, so chances are the film has been cancelled, but who knows, maybe it isn't? But if it is, that would be the third time that a Black Cat movie gets cancelled. Man, maybe Black Cats do give bad luck. So it's still up in the air what the future holds for Sony's Spider-Man centered films. Who knows, maybe one day they'll surprise us and actually make a good film, but don't hold your breath for that one, because their next film is going to be released on April 1st, meaning that even they know that their films are a joke. In the next and final part of this 3-part series, we will take a look at James Cameron's attempt at a Spider-Man movie and how it could have potentially completely altered how we look at Spider-Man movies today, as well as looking into David Fincher's pitch for a Spider-Man movie that never came into fruition. If you don't want to miss part 3, make sure to like this video and subscribe, and be sure to check out some of my other videos which are on screen right now. Thank you for watching.